Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. It was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon when those who were nearby chronicled those as being the final intelligible words of Jesus. He hanged there suffering on a wooden cross, experiencing to him what felt like total abandonment by God. He's quoting an Old Testament scripture, and he didn't take it through a 5-step process beforehand. He just used it. It's actually an old school song, and he's using it to pose a question in Aramaic that many of us are too afraid to ask in English. He's asking, my God, why have you forsaken me? Surely you've thought the same thing at some point in your life. You may have even spoken this sentiment out loud. I would dare to say that most of us at some point in our lives have felt abandoned by God. Perhaps you felt abandoned by having your home foreclosed on. Maybe you felt abandoned because of that car accident that happened to you unexpectedly. Maybe you felt abandoned by God because of the sudden death of a loved one. We tend to generally not care about where God is until we're experiencing unimaginable pain or facing uncertain days. Maybe you or someone you know is suffering from the coronavirus that's wreaking havoc all across the world. Perhaps you're standing by like so many other entrepreneurs, watching your business crumble, watching your savings dwindle right before your very eyes, and there's literally nothing you can do about it. And like Jesus, you're left wondering, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. You know what? I want to challenge you to adopt that Aramaic phrase into your vernacular. Instead of cursing people out, you ought to learn to say, lama sabachthani. Instead of giving people a piece of your mind, you ought to learn to say, lama sabachthani. When the neighbor's dog poops in your driveway, lama sabachthani. When it's your turn to wash dishes, lama sabachthani. When you wake up with chest pains in your leg, lama sabachthani. When you're driving through traffic, lama sabachthani. It's an interrogative expression that not only wants to get at the cause, the reason or purpose for the abandonment, but it also calls into examination the spatial realities of God. My wife and I had a busy weekend a few weeks ago. There were 4 places we had to be on Saturday, 3 places we had to be on Sunday, and had to take a flight out of state on Monday. On that Saturday, we had to be at a family member's wedding, a lunch date, a wedding reception, and lastly, a friend of ours from California was visiting Austin with his band, Moonchild. And he blessed us with some free tickets, so we felt compelled to oblige. We knew that in order to pull this hectic schedule off, that our departure times and our travel times from place to place had to be on lock. And if you're like us, you don't really know where you're going until you're backing out of the driveway. Can I get a witness? So here we are. My wife pulls out her phone to type in the address of the first location, and Samantha comes on and she tells us which way to turn. The problem was, on this particular Saturday, it was raining and extra cloudy. And you already know that the weather conditions drastically affect Samantha's accuracy. So my wife has her phone, we're following Samantha, and all of a sudden the pin drops. So Samantha recalculates the route, and has us going a completely different direction. But a few minutes after heading in that direction, the pen drops again. I had had all I could take. I said, you know what? Stand back. Give me the aux cord. This is a job for an iPhone. So I typed up the address in my iPhone. Let's follow these directions. Nancy. From Nancy. So she begins to tell us where to go. First we head east, then we take a short right into an alley. There was one-way traffic on a two-way street, and construction workers were blocking the only way in and out. And I'm embarrassed to say, we were lost again. Give me the aux cord, and Nancy is taking over from here. So I swallowed my pride and humbly gave the aux cord back to my wife and Samantha. So Samantha recalculates the route, but this time she was frustrated. She began saying some things we had never heard her say. My wife was like, did you hear? I heard it. At one point, I promise you, I heard her say,
"Child, it's too much. It's too much."
And then she stopped talking altogether. Now, you know when a woman stops talking, somebody's in trouble. Samantha was no match for the cloudy skies. Isn't it strange how cloudy days and rainy days can completely alter the connectivity we have to our surroundings? Similarly, the clouds in our personal lives can prevent us from fully beholding what is clearly seen in optimal conditions. Although the pen dropped en route to the destination a few times, that doesn't mean the destination ceased to exist. Okay, we're good. Oh, no, the building just disappeared. The building just disappeared. Oh, it's back. Okay, we're good now. Oh, isn't that ridiculous? The building is not disappearing, and neither is God. Just because you can't pinpoint him with accuracy doesn't mean that he's not near. Your ability or inability to see God doesn't legitimize nor invalidate his existence. Am I only a God nearby and not a God far away? Jeremiah 23:23. He's a God who's near and far. A God you can both understand and a God who will leave you scratching your head. And yet God makes a concession for our human intellects. He allows us to define his spatial reality in human terms, even if it's not completely rooted in reality. He does it so that we can better comprehend his essence. In strictly human terms, how can you be both near and far? In human terms, to say that he's near denies his ability to both simultaneously be far. And to say that God is far denies his ability to simultaneously be near. But if it helps your feeble attempts at understanding God, he says, think of me as both near and far. I'm near and far, and I don't fit neatly into either category. This is known as an anthropomorphism. It's the attribution of human traits upon non-human entities. One of the old school songwriters said it this way, Psalm 139, 4-8. Before a word is on my tongue, you, Lord, know it completely. You hem me in behind and before, and you lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too lofty for me to attain. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. And if I make my bed in the depths, you are there. Today I want you to hear God saying these words to you. I'm God with you, and I'm God away from you. I'm God where you are right now, and I'm God where you're going. If God were only God where we're going, what we're experiencing right now would be too much to bear in his absence. And if God were only God where we are right now, the uncertainty around where we're headed would be too much to bear in his absence. So this is an invitation to live sober-mindedly with respect to both our present and our future reality. It's imperative that we don't straggle too far behind God, or that we don't get too far ahead of God in this season, but that we keep right in step with God. The danger of getting too far behind God is that we become religious. Tweet this. Religious people can only recognize God's back. We recognize his power in days gone by, but not in the present reality. We do what worked for the ancestors out of routine and not from the heart. We go to church to receive a blessing, but we never go looking to be a blessing to someone else. But if God has to snatch a building away from us in order to create a hunger and a thirst for real, authentic community, that's exactly what he will do. When we get too far behind God, he will sometimes cause an interruption in our tradition if it means getting our attention in order to put us back on the right track. Look at what Jeremiah says to the people a few verses earlier. So then the days are coming, declares the Lord, when people will no longer say, as surely as the Lord lives, who brought the Israelites up out of Egypt. But they will say, as surely as the Lord lives, who brought who? The descendants of Israel up out of the land of the north and out of all the countries where he had banished them. Then they will live in their own land. Jeremiah 23 verses 7 and 8. We see God seizing an opportunity not just for the people of Israel, but for the people of Israel's children, because he wants to update their testimony. He wants to give them an experience of their own. He wants to give them something true and real and authentic that creates a fervor in their hearts and a hunger in their spirits for him. It's time out for living off of your parents' experience. It's time out for celebrating what God has done for other people. God says, I want to give you a real, personal, one-on-one encounter with me. You'll be able to say firsthand how COVID-19 impacted your life, how it impacted your home and your state, and to be able to express how God was faithful through all of it. On the contrary, the danger in getting too far ahead of God is that we become rebellious. We think we know more than God knows. If we eat of this fruit, we will not surely die, will we?
Bruh.
We think that God is too clunky and God is too slow, and we become more susceptible to deception, to pride, to lies, and fear. Actually, this truth about God being both near and far, it's actually a critique in response to teachers, watch this, and leaders And those in charge, the prophets, the politicians, the presidents, the kings, the elite, the influencers, you see, they were going around claiming that they were speaking on God's behalf, that they were speaking for God, that they were God's mouthpiece. But in actuality, they were pulling people away from God. We see in Jeremiah's letter that God is giving them a good tongue lashing. Why? Because they were guilty, watch this, of peddling cheap hope. It was hope devoid of responsibility. Their leaders were liars. Their leaders were liars. I know that doesn't happen anymore. They allow themselves to be led into idolatrous practices that God strictly forbid. And the people out here fussing and fighting about which preacher and which teacher and which prophet and which political leader is the best at telling lies. When me and my brother and my sister were younger, growing up in Beaumont, Texas, we loved to play kickball with our cousins. One of us would be the pitcher. We had a few people in the outfield. We had a shortstop. We had someone on first base. We had someone on second base. We had someone on third base. We had someone on home base. But every now and then, one of us would get in trouble in the middle of a game. You would hear somebody calling out,
Get away! Get your butt in this house right now!
and it would bring the entire game to a screeching halt because it took everyone playing their positions in order for the game to work properly. So when little cuz would go in the house, I'd give it a few minutes. I wasn't going to rush right in. But I'd go in and see how much trouble he was in. I needed to know how severe this punishment was because his punishment affected my happiness. I wanted to keep playing the game. And I needed him to come back outside and play his role. Doesn't that sound like today's politicians? They just want to keep the game going. They don't care about your health. They don't. Some politicians can't wait to get you back in the game. I'd stop by and try to make him laugh. I wanted to keep his morale high for when he returned to the game. But I had to be careful because if my aunt or any other grown-up in the house saw me making him laugh while he was in trouble, then I would get in trouble. Why? Because I was rushing him to a place of joy prematurely. I was peddling hope devoid of responsibility. Does that remind you of what's going on today? That's certainly what's going on in the text. God is saying, I see the lies you tell. I see the idolatry you practice. I see the ways you distribute cheap hope in order to make your name famous. They were actually on their way into a 70-year quarantine. It was literally the quarantine of a lifetime. Sometimes God will bring you to a place where people can't reach you so that He can teach you. They were being quarantined not for a virus that they contracted, but make no mistake, they were definitely diseased. They were infected with hypocrisy. They were infected with idolatry. They were infected with pride. What disease are you carrying? We may not all be infected the same way, but we all have something in our lives that needs to be quarantined. Perhaps it's our anger. Perhaps it's our apathy. Or is it an addiction? It could even be our anxiety. Whatever it is, I encourage you to take God into your quarantine. I don't know how long the conditions in our world will be as they currently are. And be clear, I'm not saying this COVID-19 virus is punishment. So don't send me no dirty messages. I want to keep playing the game. I don't know if it's corrective or coincidental. All I know is although this is a corrective response from God through Jeremiah, it's at the same time comforting and reassuring. The good news is that we do have a God who's both near and far. And to those who trust in God, you never have to be afraid. Not only that, but watch this. Jesus allows God to be even nearer to us than he was in the time Jeremiah penned this letter. Friends, I hope you believe in Jesus, that he is God's son. And because of our inability to meet God's standard of rightness, God sent him here to rescue us from impending judgment. Believe it, own it, and become a part of God's family who continually look at our lives in comparison to God's word and the way Jesus modeled it for us, allowing God to make necessary modifications in our lives that we can't make ourselves. I want to leave you with an excerpt from Moses. As he prepares to leave the earth, he tells God's people, Deuteronomy 31:8, "The Lord himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you, nor forsake you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged." Then the author of Hebrews quotes Moses and attaches another old school song with it. Another example of a New Testament teacher taking an Old Testament quote, but he integrated it into his own context. The writer says in Hebrews 13, "Keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have, because God has said, 'Never will I leave you, never will I forsake you.'" So we may say now with confidence, "The Lord is our helper. I will not be afraid. What can mere mortals do to me?" And so my prayer is that you would lean into those realities, that God has not abandoned you, that God has not left you alone, that God is near and that God is distant, that he's both close and he's in our future. And so walking with him into it is not a surprise to him, that we would put our full trust and confidence in him, that we would put hope in him, that we would allow ourselves to be fooled and lied to by the leaders of our day, that we would trust God with our lives because he knows what's best for us. Lastly, starting this Wednesday, we're going to begin examining examples of quarantines and exiles and social distancing and wilderness experiences that we see all throughout the scripture. You'll see how you can join us for that study in the comment section. I want to start with the people that we encounter in Jeremiah's letter. I want to dig deeper into that story. Who were they before the quarantine, and who did they become after the quarantine? I want to know how did the distance impact their relationship with God? How did the distance impact their neighborhoods? What was God able to accomplish through them? What was God like in the quarantine? And we can also share our own thoughts about what we're experiencing in the quarantine, any fears we may have, any challenges, any celebrations we may have. We can discuss that on Wednesday as well. I look forward to sharing with you again. Be blessed. Until then.